We want to be able, we want you to allow us to intercede for you in that space, because here's what we don't want. What we don't want is we don't want you to allow life's hardships, whether it's past or it's present, to take over you, finding comfort in the darkness of that broken, beaten down, battered heart. So after years of attempting to reconcile, and by years, y'all, I mean about half the relationship, my former husband and I, we decided to end our marriage. Divorce was on the horizon, and the shame and the guilt that I felt from the mess that I had made of my life was taking over every part of me. There were adulterous affairs committed by both of us. One of those affairs led to an unwanted and ultimately it was an unplanned and ultimately unwanted pregnancy that I decided to terminate with an abortion. I'd made the heartbreaking, and not just heartbreaking, but the terrifying decision to leave my then only child, my 8-year-old son, to be with his dad. And then there was all the big trauma from my teenage years that I had convinced myself and tried to convince others around me that I had dealt with it. No, I'm fine, I'm good. I had just a little over a month after moving from a small town in Oklahoma to here in Texas, I was violently raped by an older classmate. I wish I could stand up here and tell you that just catapulted me to the cross. But that's not my story. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the equipment. I kept that to myself. I didn't tell anybody about that. And so what that did for me was that turned life into just an immense amount of sexual sin as a teenager. And those choices would eventually lead me less than a year later as a 16-year-old girl, pregnant and aborting a baby. I was being consumed, being engulfed by not only my own sin, but by the sins that had been committed against me. My heart was hardened. I had built these huge walls around myself. I was self-protecting. You were not going to get in. I kept everyone at arm's length, and I'm sure I was hell to deal with for my parents, and even for my friends. Comfort and rest, not even anything I thought about. And if I had thought about it, honestly, it was probably something that I didn't feel like I deserved. I was a Christian at the time. I'd been on fire for the Lord for years. And after that ripping away of my innocence, I believed this soundtrack that played over and over in my head. You can't go to church. You got to get yourself cleaned up a little bit, girl. Nobody's going to want anything to do with you. Look at what you've done. And it played over and over and over again in my mind. But Paul Tripp states on page 204, he says, it's right then in the darkness of our aloneness, our loss, and our fear, that the light of the gospel of God's presence and grace shines most brightly. Out of our darkest travail, glorious beauty shines. He goes on to say that no passage captures how beautifully rest and peace of heart can live in the middle of the unwanted, the unthinkable, and the unplanned hardships of life, like Habakkuk 3:17 through 19. It reads, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food. The flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. Now, to know the importance and the encouragement of this passage, we must first have an understanding of the context in which it was written. When the prophet wrote these words, the economic system was based on agriculture alone. Now, being an Okie from a small farm community, you are. I can somewhat relate to that, somewhat. I can remember in the late summer, in the 90s, where Wednesday night church services for all the surrounding little churches, like they would all meet together and they would praise and they would just call out to the Lord to bring the rain. You could drive down Main Street where the little restaurants, the mom and pop cafes and the little burger joint, and you'd see painted on the outside of the window, lunch special, $2.99. Pray for rain, y'all. We were in a drought, and the agriculture that supported our community would soon suffer if the rains didn't come, and they didn't come quickly. But you see, in this passage, the fig and the olive trees, they've not only failed to produce food, they haven't even blossomed. It's not that the livestock are unhealthy, starving, dehydrated, with a risk of dying. They're completely gone. The people of this time are in a season of total cultural and economic devastation. There's absolutely nothing left. There's nowhere for them to look for hope, and there's nowhere to turn to for help. Now, I know some of you in here might be thinking right now, okay, first off, Ellie Mae, I'm not from a small farm community in Oklahoma. And second, what does this have to do with anything in the 21st century? Hashtag, what is this chick even talking about? And that's fair. That's totally fair. I'm going to give it to you, and you're asking good questions. But I want you to remember what life was like just a little over a year ago when the pandemic hit. We actually don't have to go that far. Let's not even go to the toilet paper crisis, okay? Let's just revisit mid-February of this year when that Snowmageddon Snowvid thing hit our community. Rolling blackouts that were not so rolling for some. I have friends from right here at the village church that they spent 11 plus hours with no electricity. That ain't a rolling blackout, y'all. Chedrick and I have a friend out in Argyle. They just built a beautiful home out there. Flooded. Half of it gone. They get to live in half their house. And it ain't even really the good half if you ask me, but whatever. The grocery stores. Oh my goodness, the grocery stores. There was no water, no bread, no meat, no fruit, no junk food. Mamas couldn't even get baby formula for their infants. I have a friend she'd been working a lot of overtime, and she clearly doesn't watch the news. But I called her one afternoon, and I was like, hey, what are you doing? She's like, girl, I just left the grocery store. I said, ooh, what was you doing there? She said, well, I ain't got no food. I said, well, what'd you find? She said, I found a 32-ounce can of hominy and unsweet tea. She said, girl, I'm going to starve. She's dramatic, and she didn't starve. She told me, she said, let me tell you one thing about being a Texan. I said, okay, tell me. She said, it don't matter what kind of beating we take as an economy. She said, the weather, just anything. She said, how bad the Cowboys are going to suck again this year. She said, none of that matters. We don't drink unsweet tea in this state. You better put some sugar in my drink. But for real, how many of us find ways when our needs are not, and it's not even our needs, y'all, when it's our wants, when they're not even being met? How many of us find ourselves rejoicing in the Lord, looking for reasons to be thankful, looking for reasons to praise His name? Is that where we are?